Carlson, and I would like to introduce you to my new podcast, Squaring the Circle, and to talk a little bit about the ideas and the philosophy upon which it is based. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the meaning of the squaring of the circle. Mathematically, to square the circle means to draw or construct, in the lingo of geometry, a circle and square of equal area using only the tools of classical geometry. And that would be an unmarked straight edge. Now this, of course, is a marked straight edge, but these are the two tools, an unmarked straight edge and compasses. And these were all that were allowed within the geometric exercises, the drawing exercises in the traditional modes of teaching. Now, a variation of this idea of the squaring of the circle is also called the rectification of a circle. In this case, you have a circle and a square of equal perimeter rather than area. And a circle and square of equal perimeter are constructed, again, using only the classical tools of traditional Euclidean geometry as taught in the academies and lodges of ancient times. The exercise of squaring the circle has profound meaning within the system of sacred geometry, as it is called. While there seems to be an attitude among some uneducated superficial thinkers that sacred geometry is somehow woo, the truth is that it is every bit as rigorous as the most demanding standards of Euclid. The thing that differentiates ordinary Euclidean geometry as a set of axioms, definitions, and propositions from sacred geometry is that to scholars in ancient times, geometry was conceived as a vehicle for the propagation of symbolism and deep philosophical meaning. It was also conceived as a means of demonstrating the teleological nature of creation, and hence as evidence of an all-encompassing supreme intelligence. With regard to the premises of meaning underlying the squaring of the circle exercise and its symbolic associations, the website learnreligions.com informs us that, and I quote, "In Euclidean geometry, squaring the circle was a long-standing mathematical puzzle that was proved impossible in the 19th century. The term also has been used as a symbol in alchemy, particularly in the 17th century, and it has a metaphorical meaning, attempting anything that seems impossible. Philosophically and spiritually, to square the circle means to see equally in four directions, up, down, in, and out, and to be whole, complete, and free." End of quote. Squares and circles, in their contrasting properties, have been interpreted as symbols representing the duality of existence and creation. Typical meanings that have been associated at one time or another, historically or traditionally, with these two fundamental forms are, for example, the square, things that are rational and measurable; the circle, things that are irrational and immeasurable. The circle, or rather the square, is a symbol of matter, while the circle has been taken as a symbol of spirit. The square as things finite, and the circle things infinite. And finally, the square has often been taken as a symbol for the earth itself, and heaven is represented as a circle. You may have heard the reference to the four corners of the earth, which is an allusion to this idea of the earth as a square. The exercise of squaring the circle is then a metaphor for the reconciliation of opposites, as represented by these contrasting associations. Now, while a perfect mathematical solution to the problem of squaring the circle is impossible mathematically, in the real world it isn't necessary to square the circle with absolutely perfect mathematical precision. Ancient philosophers, geometricians, and builders had several methods by which they could approximate the squaring of the circle with near exactitude, and there are multiple examples of these techniques being employed in a wide variety of times and places around the world and throughout history. The idea here is that one does not need to realize perfection in the manifested realm, rather a close enough approximation to effectively induce resonance among the parts and the whole system will suffice. As an example, the human ear, unless highly trained, would not hear the difference between the note A in the diatonic scale vibrating at 440 hertz or cycles per second, and the note A vibrating in the Verdi scale at 432 cycles per second. So, reiterating a fundamental idea. At the core of the philosophy of sacred geometry is the idea of harmony and how it might be achieved through the reconciliation of opposing forces, systems, or events. And the preeminent exercise representing the realization of harmony is that of squaring the circle. Now, in terms of contemporary events unfolding about the world, a fundamental premise of the Squaring the Circle podcast is that humanity is now facing challenges that utterly dwarf in scale and significance the contentious issues and manufactured controversies driving current policy objectives and priorities. The problems before us seem at times impossible of solution, and yet, because so much of the chaos and turmoil afflicting the world today is the result of human action, then human action can be applied towards the solution of these problems, provided we don't succumb to complacency, cynicism, despair, or fear. In a culture of 15-second sound bites and diminished attention spans, it is imperative to encourage a deeper awareness and discussion of those issues upon which literally the long-term survival of civilization depends. Mainstream media, educational institutions, and government propaganda are all devoted to dumbing us down and keeping us distracted with matters both insignificant and irrelevant. We must reject this tactical promotion of ignorance by agenda-driven factions while employing the tools of science and nature that have been placed within our hands and that have the potential to effect a major upgrading of human intelligence. While we employ the power of human reason and the methods of science, we must not neglect the traditional ways of knowing and learning that by their very nature require and promote the development of an attentive ear and a retentive mind. This fusion of modern science with traditional systems of knowing is a primary emphasis of the Squaring the Circle podcast, with the goal, always in mind, of advancing comprehension of the big picture of the world and the long view of history. Sometimes, however, to perceive things from an expanded perspective, it is necessary to break matters down into manageable fragments and to understand the relationship of the parts to each other and to the whole. The key to harmony in any system is the proportional relationship between the whole and the parts. As the saying goes, the devil, or God, take your pick, is in the details. So in the Squaring the Circle podcast, we will alternate between a range of perspectives, exploring the relationship of the parts to the whole to better enable us to achieve broad knowledge and comprehension of that information which is vital to the survival and ultimately to the success of human civilization on Earth. Within this framework of inquiry, we will exclude no subject matter a priori as fair game for discussion, debate, and critical analysis. One never knows where the jewels of enlightenment might be hiding. We take the position that it is time to transcend the obsolete and artificial dichotomy of left and right political ideologies. Rather, our orientation is transcendental. If the superstructure of our cultural and political philosophy is established upon three fundamental pillars, consisting of freedom, peace, and truth, if mutual respect and true tolerance prevail, then the areas of commonality and cohesion will far exceed those of contention, disagreement, and strife. And when, of necessity, an organic reconciliation of opposing worldviews evolves, then and only then can America achieve the true greatness that is her destiny, and only through that means will America be exceptional among nations. It has been an inconceivably long journey from our unknown beginnings to have arrived where we now find ourselves as a civilization and as a species. But it is not enough to merely survive. Our ancestors accomplished that, and evidently a great deal more than that. For over 200,000 years, mankind has occupied this planet. The evidence implies that those people of so long ago were, anatomically at least, equivalent to modern humanity, and that must include the presumption of an equivalence in intellectual capacity. If pre-existing models of prehistory are correct, we must assume that for thousands of generations, humankind achieved no cumulative learning that could lead to a scientific understanding of the world and nature. But how can it be that for thousands of generations our ancestors never advanced beyond primitive nomadic lifestyles of hunting, gathering, and foraging? How can it be that no transgenerational knowledge was passed on which could enable the emergence of culture and ultimately civilization until only 5,000 or 6,000 years ago? So, we are open to the idea that there have been former times of scientific sophistication and advanced civilization now lost to history. It is not assumed that such a civilization, if it existed, would necessarily look anything like our own. But the question begging to be asked is this: if there was some incarnation of an advanced civilization or civilizations, and if they were to some degree successful, why then did they ultimately become lost? This is a fair question. In fact, it is likely to be the most crucial question of our time, and one which we will explore deeply in this podcast series. I believe that it is vital that we continually ask questions and that we reject all attempts to suppress or limit our right and our ability to ask crucial questions, especially to our presumptive rulers and in response to expect truthful answers from them. When we embark upon the hero's journey in pursuit of knowledge and ultimately wisdom, our success in that quest depends upon asking the right questions. Through embarking on the quest, we become, symbolically, Knights of the Grail, that preeminent symbol of enlightenment in Western philosophy and metaphysics, an instrument of salvation which has been lost, then found, then lost again. If the ancient quest is to be successful, and the Grail to be found again, we will have within our hands the power to restore the wasteland, to break the hypnotic spell that holds humanity in bondage to unawareness and ignorance. But success in the Grail question does completely depend upon asking the right questions at the right time. So allow me to reiterate a basic premise of my new podcast. Philosophically and strategically, again, I believe those three essential pillars, without which no civilization can successfully endure, are freedom, peace, and truth. And this perspective will inform and govern the ideological orientation expressed in this podcast. And it is my belief that the restoration of an authentic America and the vision upon which she was founded must be built upon these three pillars. Which brings us to this: an authentic understanding of America's role in history and in the contemporary world has been obscured by a tsunami of propaganda and self-serving power grabs which subvert the original vision of liberty upon which this nation was founded. That there are power-seeking factions who have hijacked the machinery of the American state is indisputable. And to advance their control, they employ tactics with the primary purpose of sowing division amongst the people of this nation, while simultaneously keeping us distracted with contrived crises and controversies of no long-term relevance whatsoever. Their stratagems of control will, even in the best-case scenario, condemn humankind to a Malthusian future of deprivation, restriction, and scarcity. But what these factions fear the most is an awakened humanity. Hence, their continuing efforts to control the narratives that determine our social, cultural, psychological, and spiritual consciousness. It is this attempt to dumb us down that must be resisted. The time has come for a strategy of renewal and regeneration. Based upon that supposition, the topics, themes, and ideas that I intend to explore, discuss, and synthesize in this new podcast will cover a wide range of terrain, including authentic global and environmental and climatic change, catastrophism, regenerative energy and quantum technology, regenerative agriculture, the restoration of an authentic education and how that can be accomplished, regenerative healing and life extension, ancient civilizations and world history, and what we can learn, what we must learn from our past, which includes America's suppressed and forgotten history. Also scientific advances in the realms of geology, astronomy, archaeology, exobiology, cosmic ecology, psychedelics, space exploration and colonization, and more. And given that we don't shy away from the fringe, we will include mythology, metaphysics, spirituality, lost knowledge, and arcane traditions. Always present in the Squaring the Circle podcast will be the recognition that we find ourselves at an evolutionary crossroads, both as a species and as a civilization. Before us are two paths, one leading to exaltation and glory that we are only just beginning to perceive, the other to oblivion, chaos, and ultimately extinction. We can build a holy city, or we can obliterate the efforts of 10,000 years of epic struggle that have led us now to the threshold of cosmic existence. The mind-blowing grandeur of the universe lies spread out before us, beckoning to us, calling us to come forth and harvest its infinite resources of matter and energy while embracing our true nature as cosmic beings, children of the stars, and ambassadors of terrestrial life. And in this, the greatest of all adventures, the great work of our time, all the nations of earth can share a common aspiration to create a world worth passing on to future generations for centuries and millennia to come. Learning to navigate the road ahead towards harmony and life affirmation is the goal and purpose of my new podcast. Oblivion or exaltation? The choice is ours. It is time, people, to think big. I hope you will join me in this quest. Thank you. I'm Randall Carlson.